This is the second day, or probably the third day in a row that we are starting with reference to the Financial Times. Now, this particular edition, obviously, the Financial Times is printed from at least 4 or 5 international locations. And this one is, of course, printed at a location around London in the UK. And on page 25 of today's Financial Times, there is a piece which we call it a vindication of, let's say, everything the saintly baby Geronimo has asserted about the injustice that he has been met with and offered and treated with and abused by, and of course his mom, Helen MacDonald. This is the first time in a very long time that any Fleet Street newspaper has published anything like this. And I mean it seriously, because anyone watching this program, this KhoodeelaarTV television channel, which has been, with few kind of exceptions, a few days, technical reasons, we haven't broadcast, but it is broadcast every day, and it has been broadcast since, let's say, July. I'll have to check and update on that, but July 2020. And the main consistent theme of the analysis that I have been presenting of the inadequacies of Fleet Street newspapers, and by definition, inadequacies of the UK Parliament, inadequacies and corruption of the British judicial bureaucracies. These are the phrases that I have been using. No newspaper has mentioned the concepts that I have been developing in these seminars, let's say, because these are not the usual kind of broadcasts. These are seminars, intensive and very detailed and very factual. Now, this is something that baby Geronimo has inspired, this particular kind of intensive references to the concepts of rule of law, due process, and the concept of the doctrine of separation of powers. No newspaper has dealt with any of those in the, let's say, last 14 months that we have been broadcasting this program, with me emphasizing very clear constitutional law defects and corruption in the UK state. Now, as I said, on the 31st of August, something we need to investigate about on behalf of baby Geronimo. And it is also something that needs to be investigated generally to stop the darkness that has been dominating England, little England. The darkness that has allowed the UK state, and specifically the DEFRA department, to mount and carry out 4 years of harassment. 4 years of harassment, persistent harassment of the saintly baby Geronimo as looked after by his mom, Helen MacDonald. And as soon as he got involved with the actual study of the publicly accessible evidence of the harassment and the illegality and the criminality aimed at Helen MacDonald, of course, and as part of the plot to murder perfectly innocent, perfectly healthy boy, Geronimo. The murder plot has been described by a man called Stanley P. Johnson as a random murderous errand. In a piece that Stanley Johnson wrote in the Sun newspaper, which described him as their wildlife reporter. Now, and this is the, as I say, third day that we are starting with the intensive diagnosis from our perspective, original, world exclusive diagnosis of the contents of pieces in the Financial Times. On the 31st, it was the piece by Hrs Cook. And on the 1st of September, yesterday, it was a piece by Sebastian Payne. Sebastian Payne didn't discuss strictly the headline pieces that appeared today and appeared with the byline of Hrs Cook. But Sebastian Payne actually referred to the same crisis. Crisis in Parliament, crisis in the current government. Although he didn't actually spell out the legal, constitutional law kind of terminology and terms, he actually meant the same thing. So for the third day in a row, the Financial Times is the only paper that is talking about what I have been talking about in this program. And the intensity with which I'm having to discuss these issues is to do with baby Geronimo. Our campaign, our movement, internationally, objectively, calls baby Geronimo saintly, saint-like, a saint. And we shall expand on that. Because baby Geronimo represents and has represented for the last 4 years enlightenment, light, as opposed to the darkness. The darkness that today's piece in the Financial Times is actually acknowledging from the standpoint of the structure that is identifiable as the Law Society of England and Wales. Now, this piece is byline to I. Stephanie Boyce. Now, I. Stephanie Boyce is, to my knowledge, if there is any factual inaccuracies or shortcomings, we shall update those in due course. But this person, I. Stephanie Boyce, is a person of Caribbean background, and she is the current president. And she is the first president, in my knowledge. As I said, if I've got that wrong, we should be updating this aspect of the introduction in due course. But this piece in the Financial Times is headed respect for the rule of law is in jeopardy in the UK. Now, that is exactly what I've been saying, with repeated, detailed references to the various aspects of the disrespect to the rule of law that has been dominating the corrupt judicial bureaucracy. That phrase is mine. Now, this is the first time that anyone other than me has been focusing on this in the media. Think about that. And what is happening with this particular piece, which of course we'll be following up on many times, this particular piece is the kind of piece that should have been written by Keir Starmer. Why? Because it's about the abuse of the current parliament. An abuse in the way that is letting in fascism. This is also something that we've been talking about. Fascism. This is a piece on the New European by Paul Mason. Now, Paul Mason is writing this because he has published a book, a volume about fascism in Britain. So, what the disrespect for the rule of law is about is the behavior of the UK Parliament converted into a parliament of stooges that are letting in fascism. And we shall go into the details in view of the Stephanie Boyce piece on page 25 of today's Financial Times. I have been focusing on not just rule of law, but the due process as well. Anyone who wants to check the previous broadcasts of the last 14 months can see how detailed my analysis has been. An exclusive, world exclusive. Now, what Stephanie Boyce is doing is what Keir Starmer should have been doing as the so-called leader of the opposition in the parliament. But as tomorrow's dated issue of this one, Private Eye, which is issue number 1555, it has got a so-called satirical piece about Starmer. So what it is saying in the first, let's say, 2 paragraphs is what relates to the Financial Times piece by Stephanie Boyce. And as I said, we'll go into the details of what Stephanie Boyce is saying. So it's Keir Starmer writes. This is the one that is there, supposed to be satirical piece about Keir Starmer, page 27 of the issue of Private Eye number 1555. And the first paragraph, hello, it's not easy being leader of the opposition. Let me tell you. Take this week, for example. How can I do my job when there is absolutely nothing to oppose? Right? And those 2 paragraphs sum him up. So he's politically, in parliament, democratically, he is dead. And as we have been saying, he has politically murdered the Labour Party. And that is, although Private Lie is not acknowledging this is exactly what we have been saying. Because Starmer has been a stooge for the conservative kind of regime fronted by Boris Johnson. And that attitude, outlook, as summed up in those two paragraphs, is evidence of the political, legal, constitutional depth of Keir Starmer. The truth is, as is acknowledged in this piece by Stephanie Boyce, and she says, let's read this one. There is mounting anxiety in the UK legal profession that respect for the rule of law in this country is declining. She's not writing in her own capacity. She's, of course, writing in the capacity of being current incumbent in the office of the president of the Law Society. So it can be seen as the view of the president of the Law Society. There may not be everyone in the Law Society that may agree with her, but this is the majority opinion, otherwise she would not be writing it. So let's read the first paragraph once again. There is mounting anxiety in the UK legal profession that respect for the rule of law in this country is declining. The current climate and legislation due to be considered in the forthcoming parliamentary term are cause for, think about this, coming two words, serious concern. It's not a joke piece in the Sun or the Daily Mail or the Star or the Daily Express. It's a piece in the Financial Times, which is, in this context, making a very unique but long overdue publication. The next paragraph says the concept of the rule of law means that laws are made democratically. Everyone is protected by and accountable to the same laws, including government, with independent courts there to uphold these in a way that is accessible, fair, and efficient. Terms that I have been using. I have been using hardly the efficiency word, but justice and just and equal. Those are the ones that I've been using. In addition to Stephanie Boyce's accessible and fair. And the next paragraph in the Financial Times, byline to the president, current president of the Law Society of England and Wales, Stephanie Boyce. Now the next paragraph says that arrangement is undermined if government takes the view that laws, international or domestic, can be broken. The emphatic reference to open breaches of the law being made by government employees, as contained in Chris Cook's piece dated the 31st of August 2021. What did Chris Cook say? Chris Cook said, in his piece, which was in the slot called Notebook, published immediately next to the opinion leader pages, leader column, leader comments by the Financial Times. So let's see what he said. All right, he says, this is now saying the result in the search is saying it's a piece that is 3 days old. And it says, UK officials are going to great lengths. UK officials are going to great lengths to keep their secrets secret. And it says the Freedom of Information Act is being quietly gutted, that is burned, that is destroyed by civil servants. Now, people watching this from countries other than the UK may not be familiar with the expression civil servant. It means employees in government departments, also known as public servants. And the actual piece by Chris Cook, who is shown here as having written it or posted it on the Financial Times network on the 30th of August. So it has been published or has been accessible since the 31st of August. So he writes, back in 2015, a pair of senior British government officials were castigated by a judge. And the next paragraph, not next sentence, evidence they had presented to court had fallen, and then there is a quotation from the judge, still unknown, but we shall be trying to locate the name of that judge, way below the standards that the public and the court are entitled to expect of government departments and senior civil servants. What Stephanie Boyce says, the concept of the rule of law means that laws are made democratically, everyone is protected by and accountable to the same laws, including government, with independent courts there to uphold these in a way that is accessible, fair, and efficient. The arrangement is undermined if a government takes the view that laws, international or domestic, can be broken. The point that Chris Cook's subheading makes that government employees are quietly gutting the Freedom of Information Act. And then Stephanie Boyce continues in the next paragraph. That arrangement is undermined if a government takes the view that laws, international or domestic, can be broken. Recently, the UK has treated international agreements it entered into freely with a disregard that brings Britain's reliability as a partner into question. And then she goes on to the episode in Parliament last week. She says, last year, not last week. Last year, the government pitched, then hastily ditched the view that laws, international or domestic, can be broken. The point that Chris Cook is saying, and the judge actually condemned the government for doing. Let's see if we can identify that judge. Okay, it's a judge called Mr. Justice Charles. And the case is listed as in the upper tribunal case number G for George, IA /2410 to 2414. That is, the case must have begun in 2010 and continued up to 2014 up to that point. And the people who attended for the appellant, that is James EDQC and Ivan Hare, instructed by TSOL or TSOI. For the first respondent, Robin Hopkins, instructed by the solicitor to the Information Commissioner. Remember, the Information Commission is the Freedom of Information FOIA related administration organization. We shall come to that again later. And the second responded in person and not present. Now, that doesn't give the details as to which one was the government and which one wasn't the government, but let's see the beginning in that paragraph, introduction. This appeal relates to information contained in the ministerial diary of Andrew Lansley, MP, for the period 12 May 2010 to 30th of April 2011. During that period, his principal policy focus was on the NHS reform program. The information was requested by the second respondent in June 2011 under the Freedom of Information Act 2000, FOIA. That requester now lives abroad. Contact with him proved difficult but was achieved. He did not attend the hearing before me but informed the upper tribunal in writing that he supported the arguments advanced by the Information Commissioner. In response to his request, the appellant, that is the department that was fronted at that time or at the relevant time by Andrew Lansley, disclosed a redacted version of the diary, Andrew Lansley diary. The next paragraph, second paragraph, by his decision dated 26th of March 2013, the Information Commissioner ordered the department to disclose the majority of the withheld information in the redacted diary, and the department appealed to the first tier tribunal, FTT, by its decision dated 17th of March 2014, the FTT decision. The FTT, the first tier tribunal that is, varied but substantially upheld the Information Commissioner's decision. The variations were agreed by the Information Commissioner during the hearing and resulted in some of the requested information being withheld. The second respondent did not take part in the hearing before the FTT. The department has appealed the FTT decision, and its grounds of appeal are that the FTT erred in law. That is the normal kind of slogan. That an appeal is not about the actual fact or the evidence, but if the lower court against which the appeal is being made an error in law. In their approach to the assessment of the competing public interests relating to the application of the qualified exemption in Section 35, 1A, B, and D of the Freedom of Information Act, firstly by rejecting the department's submission that the first-tier tribunal's approach to the department's evidence should reflect that adopted in public interest immunity cases. Secondly, by proceeding on the basis that the public interest in disclosure can be generally set out and by concluding that the entries relating to non-ministerial activities were held by the department within the meaning of Section 3.2 of FOIA. Now, this is, all of it can be read later, but all of it cannot be incorporated in this particular part of the commentary. So let's see if we can find that part which Chris Cook actually partly quoted about the judge or from the judgment. So this is a kind of ruling dated the 30th of March 2015. So this is the judge who actually made that comment that Chris Cook quotes in part. And he agrees, he rejects the government's claim in suppressing and denying the freedom of information request. Now, what Chris Cook has said also in his piece, that even if the court rules against the government officials simply ignore the rulings. And that is what he means by government officials are burning the Freedom of Information Act, which is what Stephanie Boyce is saying, both about the Freedom of Information Act and the concept of judicial review and the destruction of the rule of law. And she's going on to talk about the European Convention on Human Rights, which I have been discussing extensively every day. And she says, recently the UK has treated international agreements it entered into freely with a disregard that brings Britain's reliability as a partner into question. That is, the UK has been lying. And we shall go into other paragraphs as well, which is what the DEFRA department has been doing for the last 4 years. As part of its intentional agenda to harass and to distress and to reduce to frequent tears of frustration, Geronimo's mom, Helen MacDonald. Now, the department, DEFRA, contains employees like the so-called chief vet in the government service called Christine Middle Miss. Now, her name is obviously not representative of any known political agenda that she would be pursuing in her life. But the spelling of middle miss neatly comes to her missing her duties that are in the middle of her attacks on the health and the innocence of the saint-like baby Geronimo. Middle Miss has ignored the substantive requests for evidence that Helen MacDonald has made for years to the DEFRA. I say for years because I have to check the actual year when Middle Miss started her role as the chief vet at DEFRA. So what I'm doing is being transparent, being absolutely factual. Contrary to what DEFRA is doing, contrary to what the department then fronted by Andrew Lonsley did, and the department did commit wrongs and lies and breaches of the Freedom of the Information Act or Freedom of Information Act. Now, I have just as with Keir Starmer, concerning Starmer's then role as the Director of Public Prosecutions during 2011, about the same set of events in Tower Hamlets, I had literally sent, if not hundreds, but dozens of emails to Andrew Lonsley in his then capacity as the Secretary of State at the expense of the NHS. Now, one thing that Andrew Lonsley and the London Mayor's Office, the bureaucracy, either when it was fronted by Boris Johnson or as it has been fronted by Sadiq Khan, the bureaucracy of the London Mayor has got an identical practice that was operated by the department and the bureaucracy that was fronted by Andrew Lonsley in 2011. Every email was followed by an instantaneous automated email responding to that email that was sent, just as the London Mayor's Office does. So what does the actual instantaneous response serve? What kind of service does it deliver? Answer is none. But what it does create an idea of is that they are acknowledging receipt and that they're reliable and they're truthful and they're transparent and all the rest of it. Same thing applies to the London Mayor's bureaucracy. And the same effect, because Sadiq Khan or Boris Johnson never replied to the substance of the email concerned, nor has Andrew Lonsley, in my experience. So Lonsley being mentioned in the 2015 ruling by the tribunal judge, Mr. Charles, was found to be behaving in the same way that I have experienced. So it's not a far away, removed from reality kind of evidence. It is something I have empirically experienced about Lonsley and about Boris Johnson and about Sadiq Khan, to name only three. And these people, including Sadiq Khan, are dishonest and, as I said, on the evidence, Keir Starmer is politically, ethically, morally, democratically dead. As his satirically written diary says, hello, it's not easy being leader of the opposition, let me tell you. Take this week, for example. How can I do my job when there is absolutely nothing to oppose? Now that means that he's a stooge. He's politically, ethically, democratically, transparently dead. And when it comes to the wrongdoing and criminality, intentional criminality and law breaking operated by the UK Central Government Department for the last 4 years, DEFRA, against baby Geronimo and his mum, Helen MacDonald, Keir Starmer has aggravated the lies and the criminality and the breaches of the law already perpetrated by DEFRA against the saintly baby Geronimo and his mom, Helen MacDonald. Because when Starmer was asked by somebody, we cannot take at this stage the origination of that particular utterance about Geronimo and the injustice that Geronimo had been put through and his mom, Helen MacDonald, had been put through. Starmer confirmed his political, moral, ethical, and democratic death. He said, without looking at the evidence, without asking to see the evidence, without asking the questioner, the person who contracted him, to give him some time to check the evidence, Starmer instantaneously said that the DEFRA murder plot against baby Geronimo must be carried out. Now, Starmer had not seen the evidence, had not asked to see the evidence. He had not even bothered to check any legal basis for a government department to plot the murder of an innocent 8-year-old Geronimo. He just straight away endorsed the murder plot. It's not me saying it. All the media reported what Starmer said against baby Geronimo. And he didn't ask for evidence that DEFRA had complied with the duty they were under according to the rule of law, according to the due process, according to the many international treaties, conventions, agreements, declarations, and charters to which the UK remains to this day. Today is the 2nd of September 2021. Signed up. It's nothing to do with the Brexit withdrawal from the European Union. It's other international spheres, relations, contracts that the UK is obliged under, which is what Stephanie Boyce is saying in this part. She says that arrangement is undermined if a government takes the view that laws, international or domestic, can be broken, which is what Chris Cook said in his notebook on the Financial Times platforms on the dated the 31st of August 2021. And it says, Stephanie Boyce, recently the UK has treated international agreements it entered into freely with a disregard that brings Britain's reliability as a partner into question. I mean, when Starmer effectively is caught saying that there is nothing to oppose, you can see that he's dead. Whereas the president of the Law Society of England and Wales says that the government is committing crimes, offenses. And she talks about these very serious issues. Let's read from the start of that paragraph. Last year, the government, that is UK government, pitched then hastily ditched clauses in the internal market bill that would have put the UK in breach of international law. There is another bill, that is, a bill is a future act of parliament. The bill is a proposal for a particular act of parliament. So one is the internal market bill, and the other is the overseas operations bill. The government, says Stephanie Boyce, considered derogating from the European Convention on Human Rights and creating a presumption against the prosecution for war crimes, genocide, torture, and crimes against humanity, ringing alarm bells at the United Nations and the International Criminal Court. Many of these proposals were dropped from the final act, but the fact that they were included in the bill in the first place again showed a willingness by the UK government to override legal norms. Remember legal norms? Legal norms are like the rule of law, due process, and the concepts that go with those. And remember, in the commentary that I've been updating in support of the saint-like baby Geronimo, I have been going over the ruling published by the UK Supreme Court on 17th of January 2017 in the case known as Belhaj case. Belhaj and another against Jack Straw and another, about the kidnapping by the American Secret Service of the Libyan couple, husband and wife, Belhaj and his wife, from two separate countries in the southeast of Asia, and kidnapping them back to Libya. And while they were traveling in that state of being kidnapped, they were being tortured on the plane by the American Secret Service, witnessed by and colluded with by the UK counterparts of the American Secret Service. That is the content of the whole case. I don't know that without the contents being in the case text, the ruling. And the ruling was dated the 17th of January 2017. And in that case, the Supreme Court refers to a section of the Magna Carta, in the version of the Magna Carta dated 1225. And if my memory serves, clause 39. But we can check the actual clause number in due course. And in that particular quotation, which the Supreme Court made favorably, that is to say, the contents of that particular quotation were seen by the Supreme Court in their judgment on the 17th of January 2017 to be of such magnitude of importance and seriousness for civil liberties, freedom of the citizen, and the right to fair access to a fair judicial system. Now, why did the Supreme Court, I've asked this before, I've shared this question for a reason. Why did the Supreme Court go all the way back 800 years? Think about that. For 800 years, England, which is being abused by Boris Johnson, by DEFRA, has had no more significant pledge for justice, for freedom, for fair treatment than is contained in the 800-year-old Magna Carta, which of course in the contemporary period went through changes shortly afterwards. But those versions did not alter the relevance and the importance of the Magna Carta dated 1225. If those versions had changed anything, then the Supreme Court would not have quoted that particular part as it did quote. And that's the importance of the Magna Carta, the declarations. What Stephanie Boyce is saying and what Chris Cook wrote about. Now, since we first contextually diagnosed Chris Cook's piece in the context of the criminality and law-breaking being done for the past 4 years by DEFRA against baby Geronimo and his mom, Helen MacDonald, we didn't know anything about Chris Cook's background other than what I remembered as his appearance, not frequent appearance, but his regular appearance on the BBC Two television's Newsnight program as its policy editor. But the private lie that I have read from then contains this reference to Chris Cook, the same Chris Cook. It's not a reference that private lie makes lightly or about the defense of the rights of Helen MacDonald or of the saintly baby Geronimo. Private lie makes the point about the history of Chris Cook in the column called Street of Shame. That is the column. And that's where Chris Cook is mentioned. But that is a reference to Chris Cook as part of Private Lie's attack on the Daily Mail. This is not an attack based on ethics or morality or principle. It's a tactical kind of attack that justifies Private Eye's calling this column Street of Shame, and it reads, the Mail on Sunday, that is part of the Private Lie group, the Mail on Sunday's fervent support for the BBC board directors are Robbie Gibbs' campaign. Now, Robbie Gibbs is, of course, a right-winger, very much a right-winger that has been appointed by the Boris Johnson-fronted cabal. So, reading again, the Mail on Sunday's fervent support for BBC board director Sir Robbie Gibbs' campaign to stop alleged political appointee Jess Brahma getting a senior role in the BBC's news department stepped up another notch last Sunday. Apparently, the supposedly left-wing Brahma has plenty of media allies, described to this newspaper, that is the Mail on Sunday, as a lefty lynch mob who have defended her. Now we pause there before moving on to the next paragraph in Private Lie. There is no left-wing lynch mob anywhere in this country. Never has been. And my decades of engagement about these political factions in this country, my engagement covers many decades. My engagement shows that there is no left-wing political movement in this country, and there is no mob. That is my finding, which is more authoritative and authentic and verifiable and reliable than anything Private Lie is saying there. But Private Lie has got a thing about the Mail on Sunday or the Daily Mail, because that is part of the fodder, that is part of the contents that make this column, Street of Shames, so that it kind of tickles these papers, not really seriously exposing them, but tickles them. So that's the paragraph, and the next paragraph after that. Among those named and shamed by the Mail on Sunday was Chris Cook, now a senior reporter at the Financial Times and a neighbor of Brahma in southeast London. That is within quotation mark. Indeed, such an extreme left-winger is Cook that prior to working with Brahma on the BBC's Newsnight for 4 years, last decade, he worked as an advisor to Conservative MP David Willetts. That is the fact that we didn't know until yesterday. We read this in the Private Lie, which is officially not out until tomorrow, Friday the 4th of September. Well, Friday the 3rd of September, really, not 4th. Today is the 2nd, Thursday. Now, if Chris Cook was a political advisor to David Willetts, a Conservative MP, who is now not, as far as I know, an active member of parliament, but is an active participant in a conservative, quote, think tank. So if Chris Cook was working with or for a Conservative MP, then he was not only not a left-winger, and he most certainly was not part of the lynch mob against anybody. For the purpose of highlighting the criminality by DEFRA, we have done a long commentary, and we don't know to what extent the Chris Cook piece against the corrupt, law-breaking government departments has contributed to any stance that DEFRA has taken in the last 48 hours against baby Geronimo and against Helen MacDonald. We don't know at this stage. But even though we don't know what they have done, it is quite clear that government departments, which all of them monitor the contents of the media and would actually have seen Chris Cook's attack on their lying and law breaking. But they would have been quite concerned about the fact that the Financial Times was the only paper that was saying what, in effect, DEFRA had been doing against the baby Geronimo and his mom, Helen MacDonald. If they have done anything worse than what they had been doing for 4 years against baby Geronimo and his mom, Helen MacDonald, based on the fact that the Financial Times was beginning to be on their case or onto their case, then it would confirm, of course, what Chris Cook had written about the government employees breaking Freedom of Information Act and the other laws. Now, essentially, in the framework, the private eye clarification about the background, political background of Chris Cook, and this item by Stephanie Boyce about the respect for the rule of law is in jeopardy in the UK, confirm the pattern, the operation of the agenda, the hostile, criminal, illegal, violent agenda as put in 3 words, the random murderous errand, described by a man called Stanley P. Johnson, who is the biological father of Boris Johnson. And as Josh White, in a piece in the Daily Mail in the last 10 days, quoted Boris Johnson's spokesperson commenting on the question about the demand for justice for Geronimo and the demand for the dropping of the agenda against Geronimo. Josh White quoted just one word, that Boris Johnson would not drop the random murderous errand that existed at that date against Geronimo. He says, no, Boris Johnson would not support the call for justice for the innocent Geronimo. And reporters such as Josh White, Liz Hull, Natasha Clark. Natasha Clark is with the Sun. Liz Hull is with the Mail, as is Josh White. All of them have known, all of them have seen more than enough, more than necessary documentary, chronological evidence that thoroughly vindicates Helen MacDonald, corroborates everything she has said evidentially. And they have seen baby Geronimo more than once, several times, as have millions of people. And baby Geronimo has been for the last 4 years in absolute perfect health. When the president of the Law Society writes in the Financial Times today that the government has put respect for the rule of law in jeopardy in the UK, she could not put it more accurately and more truthfully. As is experienced by Helen MacDonald. Geronimo We call him the saint-like. We shall call him Saint Geronimo as well. Now, what baby Geronimo, the saint-like baby Geronimo, has been doing is to use the phrase made popular in the mainstream news by the one-time candidate for the Mayor of London, Stuart. Geronimo embodies sainthood in a dark place, in a dark land. Because Geronimo has been kind of the target, personalized target of anonymous, some named but mostly anonymous, defamers, attackers, because Geronimo has been in the best of health for 4 years. And Geronimo, by all description, by all comments from all the observers, is, as the biological, physical attributes go in his species, Geronimo has been universally described as a beautiful boy, 8-year-old beautiful boy. And what the president of the Law Society is saying is exactly what Geronimo would say if he wrote the piece, or Helen would say if somebody talked to her. Helen has said in multiple statements over the last few weeks, public statements, that the way that DEFRA has been behaving by targeting her for denials and by depriving her of the information that she has all along been entitled to according to the law, has often made her feel that she is being punished for no reason, and that she has been feeling as if she has been tortured. Remember not only the concept of the Magna Carta, but also the concept, the right to habeas corpus. In a way, many of the days and nights and weeks and months and years, 4 years, have been inflicted on Helen as periods of enduring oppression for no reason. In fact, on the evidence, Helen has been subjected to the hostilities and targeting by DEFRA because she has been too caring, too dedicated, and too compassionate. Now, if a human being is targeted for this kind of behavior by a state department, a department in the state, then the environment in that country cannot be said to be compatible with the concept of rule of law or due process, which is what Stephanie Boyce is saying. So therefore it is a dark land. Remember, 800 years. And the various attempts that Boris Johnson fronted cabal of the Conservatives, numerically enjoying and abusing a very large majority in the elected House of Commons. Since the 12th, was it 19th or 12th of December, I think, election, 2019, Johnson-fronted cabal has been attempting to complete the destruction of society, which Margaret Thatcher said there is no such thing, said about society as follows: there is no such thing as society. So the Boris Johnson fronted cabal, which was presented as a gift of a landslide in the 2019 UK general election by the idiotic cabal that claimed to be the leadership of the Labour Party, fronted by the very intellectually challenging and challenged Jeremy Corbyn. Why? Because Corbyn didn't have to agree with the election of 2019. Because according to the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which was passed by dodgy David Cameron, an election could be held later than 2019. Because that was the time when the majority of the gullible people that are prone to react positively to any kind of slogans, patriotic slogans, etc. That was the time when the rate of the gullibles voting for the Conservatives was very high. And these things abate, these things don't stay high for too long. So if Jeremy Corbyn was intelligent, and if his cabal of so-called Labour MPs in the shadow cabinet, so-called, and the Labour Party policy making outfit, whether the NEC or the internal administration in the Labour Party leadership, if they were intelligent, they would have refused to hold the election in 2019, and Boris Johnson would have failed. Because if the election took place even 8 months later, Johnson would have not got anything like the 80 plus or whatever, nearly 80 member majority. And as soon as he got that majority, Johnson set about doing the fascistic things. It is what is happening with the current parliament is fascistic. It's sleepwalking fascism. Because Starmer really doesn't think that there is anything that he can oppose anything in the current government plan, which is what sums him up and which is what confirms the operation of fascism under the guise of parliamentary democracy. Any student of fascism in Germany can see that. Germany had two democratic episodes favoring fascism, and the second one succeeded from the fascist standpoint in totally exploiting and abusing the gullibility of the public to achieve apparent legitimacy, apparent democratic legitimacy for a fascist state, which the Nazis exploited for 6 years. There was no independent judiciary. There was no rule of law. There was no due process. And there was no separation of powers. There was no judicial system that held the executive to account, which is what is happening in Britain now. And while it is happening, Keir Starmer, who is supposed to act as a democratic bulwark against the fascistic movement by Boris Johnson-fronted cabal, is now in denial that he even exists politically. Starmer doesn't even exist politically. And of course, the confirmation of Keir Starmer admitting that he doesn't politically exist was, of course, in his Starmer's criminal, murderous endorsement of the murderous errand aimed at saintly baby Geronimo and his dedicated mom, Helen. So it's not like it's Starmer making a one-off kind of mistake. He deliberately refused to look at the concept of rule of law, due process, compliance with the various relevant laws in practice, active still in the UK. He just gave the rubber stamp. Starmer, being a trained, licensed law trader, should have looked for the evidence, should have looked for the compliance by the decision makers with the requirements they were under to comply with to observe the due process, observe the various acts of parliament, observe the scientific, rational, objectively verifiable evidence to even partially substantiate their random murderous errand against the saintly baby Geronimo. What can society, and we shall come to the extent to which society has been already destroyed, what can society, what remains of society, what can society expect from a ramp or a party or a group that comes in after the current conservatives are gone? Because they will be gone. However long it may take, but they will be gone. What can society expect from Starmer, who is in voluntary denial of his own political existence? That's why I have said that baby Geronimo, the saint-like baby Geronimo, embodies the moral, the ethical, the compassionate, the objective international, and the just role, because the rest is in darkness. If the elected leader of the elected members of the Labour Party, so-called, is in denial of the fact, duties, obligations he is under, then there can be no other forum that can remotely resemble the forum that must hold the executive to account in accordance with the norms of democracy, which is what the Law Society's president, Stephanie Boyce, is referring to, and which is what this program has been examining every single edition for the last 14 months. We shall come to the rest of Stephanie Boyd's article shortly. Now here is Financial Times' kind of account of Dominic Raab's appearance before a select committee of MPs. And this is a contrast. If MPs do even 1/10 of the job that they should be doing, holding the executive to account, holding the executive to democratic account, then this onward march of fascism, murderous errands, can be stopped. Why? Because the cabal fronted by Boris Johnson is in fact, on the facts, unfit for purpose. Any query, any actual public questioning of the cabal members' activities can only produce evidence that they're unfit, that they're untruthful, and that they are betraying the duty they owe to the electors, the country, the society, which is what happened with Dominic Raab, as the Financial Times is saying here. It is saying the allies, that is the Americans and the UK, who are the main occupants of the country called Afghanistan for the last 2 decades. So Raab said to the MPs, allies, that is Americans and the British, caught out by Kabul's rapid fall. Now that is an admission that none of the Fleet Street newspapers like Daily Mail, the Scum, the daily bribing Boris Johnson graph, also known as the Telegraph, the Express, the Star, the Mirror, the Guardian, none of these papers in Fleet Street, none of these papers, including the Guardian, the Mirror, which are not overtly conservative, none of these newspapers actually did their job for the last 20 years. And even now, even in the papers after the appearance of Dominic Raab before the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, they are in denial of the evidence. And what is the evidence? The evidence relates in principle in terms of the narrative about the framework of the state and the framework of society that is supposed to be served by the state. For example, the various expressions of the National Health Service. I have been saying originally, world exclusively diagnostically, that the 75 years, let's say, since the formal launch of the National Health Service in the UK, 75 years, not 7 months or 7 weeks or 7 years. For 75 years, the evidence shows that the NHS has not been maintained in the proper state of preparedness to provide the National Health Service. Think about what I've just said. You can rewind and you can hear what I said before. And because of that, when the COVID pandemic struck nearly 2 years ago, quite apart from other factors which I shall come to, hundreds of thousands of British people were put at risk of dying due to negligence, lack of care, lack of beds in hospital, lack of doctors, nurses, you name it, and everything is there. Everything has been accounted, or everything has been counted in terms of the lack of provisions and lack of service. And then there was the additional policy that Boris Johnson actually imposed, as has been confirmed by lengthy disclosures after the facts made by Dominic Cummings. Now, Dominic Cummings is not just another career government employee or advisor. Dominic Cummings has been openly described as the real prime minister who gives orders, and the orders are either carried out or are abandoned because of Boris Johnson being unfit for purpose. And it is the phrase has been around for a while, but in terms of Boris Johnson unfitness for purpose, that phrase has been given to a member of parliament by Dominic Cummings after he fell out with Boris Johnson and left the service he was engaged in at number 10 Downing Street. So Dominic Cummings has said that when the COVID-19 pandemic hit this country, at an early stage, Boris Johnson decided to ignore his duties and let thousands of people die. Let's see if we can find the actual quotation from Dominic Cummings. So this is from the Guardian website. And this is the Guardian website, which says that this article is more than 4 months old, but it's not too long ago. So it was Monday, the 26th of April, 1959 hours local time, UK. And the piece was jointly bylined to Jessica Elgott and Robert Booth. And the heading to that piece, or heading on that piece, is Pressure Mounts on Johnson over alleged let the bodies pile high remarks. And it says underneath that heading, the subheading is Tory sources have lent weight to claim Prime Minister said he'd prefer thousands of deaths to another lockdown. Boris Johnson faced mounting pressure on Monday night as Conservative insiders added weight to claims that the Prime Minister said he would rather see bodies pile up than order another lockdown. Faced with fury from relatives of the bereaved, Johnson and senior ministers emphatically denied. He said, no more fucking lockdowns. Let the bodies pile high in their thousands, after reluctantly approving a second England-wide lockdown late last year. That claim followed a briefing war at the weekend between Johnson and his former chief aide Dominic Cummings, who resigned from Downing Street after what was believed to be a power struggle with the Prime Minister's fiancée, Carrie Simons. The government is also facing growing calls for a public inquiry into a pandemic that left the UK with one of the worst death tolls among major economies last year. First reported in the Daily Mail on Monday, Johnson's alleged comments were supposedly made after he felt corralled into agreeing to a 4-week lockdown in November, months after it was recommended by SAGE scientists to curb soaring coronavirus cases. Johnson, apparently warned he would never again back another national lockdown. And so on. So what this shows, whatever the actual details of the wording, is that this government is a fascist government when it comes to saving people from dying of the surging virus infections. And that is the evidence that Johnson and his cabal are prepared to let people suffer from disease and die in order to keep his agenda. It's not about protecting people, his agenda. And that large number, one of the worst in the so-called developed economies, as the Guardian insultingly refers to it, is evidence that the culture of the government is a culture that produces, creates, perpetuates, perpetrates random murderous errands. So what we shall be doing, this is our main theme today, Stephanie Boyce's article. We shall be continuing after the break.